Hello and welcome to this Sage 300 training video. Today's topic is accounts receivable and receipt entry. So let's begin by navigating to our accounts receivable module, AR transactions, and receipt batch list. We can see that currently we have no open batches. This is because our show posted and deleted batches is unchecked. If we check it, we can see all of our historical batches in here. And if we uncheck it, we eliminate all the ones that are posted or deleted, i.e. that are completely done and we cannot use. When we see an empty list, our only option is to hit the new button. If we had an existing batch in here that we had started and stopped for some reason, we could use the open button to open up that batch and resume processing. So we can either click the new button here, or we can go straight into receipt entry and do a similar function by clicking on the new in there. So up here you have your batch controls. You can navigate to the first batch, last batch, next, previous. You can use your finder to select a batch, or you can hit the new button, which is the green plus sign. Then you also want to set your bank account. I'm going to be processing customers who are in US dollars, so I'm going to change my bank from this Canadian bank to Seattle Tacoma Bank and process in US dollars. I could put a description in here. Now, in the transaction type, we have several options. We're going to start with receipt, and then we're going to go to we'll do unapplied cash and then prepayments, and then apply documents and miscellaneous receipts. So in our first case, we're going to select customer 1240. Now, if you don't know your customer number, you can use the finder to select them out of the list. Remember, you can find by different metrics in here. And I often use something like contains instead of starts with, a little more flexibility in what I'm looking up. Okay, so I've got my customer number. I can put a reference in here if I want. I can also put a entry description up here. The next field I have is my payment code. One of the key concepts that you want to have in your receipt entry is you want your collection of receipts that you're entering to match the deposit line on your bank statement. This will make your bank reconciliation much easier. So if you have several checks that you're depositing at once, they should be in one batch. If you have an electronic receipt, an ACH, an EFT, a wire, something like that that's coming into your bank statement, those are generally one line on your statement, so that it is unique for that customer. You're not going to have several EFTs merged together on your bank statement. You're going to see each of those individually. So in those cases, you want to have multiple batches with one entry each, whereas with your checks, you want one batch with multiple entries. So we will do a little bit of both today. We're going to start with a check, and I'm going to enter a check number. These can contain letters as well if you have received a check with letters in them. Next thing we're going to do is enter the amount of the check. And then I'm going to hit the go button here to refresh my grid. Next thing I want to do is identify the invoices being paid by the customer. So I'm going to look at my check stub, and I notice that they're paying off a few invoices here. They're paying off those two. They're paying off one for $471, and they're paying off this invoice down here for $4,648. And they are taking this credit that's on their account. This credit is resolving from an overpayment. I can tell that because the document type here is receipt. The document number is a PY. That means it is left over from a prior payment. So I'm going to select that. Now notice my unapplied amount is the amount of the credit here. So what I need to do is I need to unselect my invoice and reselect it. And now my applied amount, if if I move out, is 0, and I can see the applied amount here matches my pending balance. If you happen to notice a moment ago, it was a slightly lower amount. Now in my receipt grid, I have several columns in here, like the order number, by the way. As I look here in my invoice grid, I have several columns in here. These can be tailored to your needs. For instance, this order number normally exists way off to the right with the PO number and the shipment number and the document date, and I have selected to drag that all the way over and place that over here. You could, for instance, come over and grab the purchase order number and do likewise. There we go. And now I have that here. So if I had a PO number entered on their invoice, that would appear here. And that's useful because a lot of times customers will refer to things not by their invoice number, but by their PO number. Okay, when I am ready, I can go ahead and hit the Add button. Okay, let's look at our next scenario. That is an unapplied cash. I'm going to enter my customer number in here. And this is a case where we've received a check, but we have not received any instructions on how to apply that amount. And in this case, we'll put the check number in and our check amount. It doesn't directly tie to any of these values here. We can't correlate this with any of our numbers. We're going to have to go talk to the customer, get a hold of them, and figure out how they want this applied. And then we could go ahead and apply that amount at a later date. But, one option is to just enter it as a receipt and hit Add, and we would have a receipt unapplied of this amount. So in that case, my transaction type would be PY. I would see that on my aging or on my customer summary. However, what we want to do is do unapplied cash. I'm going to have to put that amount back in and my check number. Okay, it's probably a different check number, but that's all right. And I can hit Add. If I come back and look at that transaction here, I can see that my check number is a UC for unapplied cash. And that will identify it a little more clearly on things like a statement, as I said. Our next option is a prepayment. Now, a prepayment differs from an unapplied cash. The main difference is where does the funds go at the general ledger level. So I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to go to AR setup and account sets, and we're going to look at an account set here. Let's look at the US one. Okay, here we have our USA account set. So our receivables control is account 1115. It is a balance sheet account for accounts receivable. However, our prepayment liability account is down in the asset section. It's 2030. So when you use a prepayment, the funds received are going to offset this liability account, showing that you owe the customer that amount of money. Whereas an unapplied cash will stay within the accounts receivable account. Both of them indicate that you owe the customer some money. With the prepayment liability, those typically have a longer duration that you're holding them on your books, and certain organizations want to show those up differently on their financial statements. Other people don't have prepayments too much in their environment, and so they choose to set their prepayment liability to the same GL account as the receivables control. Mechanically in Sage, both are fine. From an accounting perspective, please talk to your auditors or your tax professionals as what's the best way to do that in your particular situation. Okay, coming back to our receipt entry screen, we're receiving a prepayment. We need to record that and have that go to our prepayment liability account. In this case, we're receiving it from Mr. Ronald Black. So I'm going to go ahead and put his customer number in here. I'm going to put a note in, deposit on order. Put my check number in. And I'm going to put my amount in. Now, one of the advantages with prepayments is that we can set them to automatically apply to a future document. And what Sage is going to do is if it makes a match, it will apply the prepayment to the invoice when the invoice comes through. Now, how is it going to make the match? It can apply by a few different functions, and we have that right here in the apply by section. So it can apply by document number, which will typically be your invoice number. It could be a purchase order number, an order number, or a shipment number. And if you recall from our lesson on invoice entry, all of those fields exist on the AR invoice. And the PO number, order number, and shipment number, if you're using the order entry module, will flow up from the order entry module into the AR module. So in this case, we are going to do it against a purchase order, and I have the purchase order here. So I will paste that in, and I can hit add. If I'm doing this against a purchase order or a sales order that was entered in the order entry module, I could use the finder to help go find that particular order in the system. But in this case, I know that this PO does not exist down in the order entry module on an open order from Mr. Ronald Black. It has yet to be created. So I am going to hit the add button, and I've now added that to my batch. Now, one of the things that we can do up here is we can see the number of entries and our total dollar amount of our batch. And this is what's going to be deposited into the bank account. And this is the amount that I'm going to see on my bank rec. Okay, let's talk about now another transaction type here, and that is the apply document. So in this case, I have a outstanding credit note for Mr. Stroud Oscar Persall that I want to apply to an invoice. So I'm going to use my finder here, and I'm going to see I have just one credit note. But if I wanted to, if I had multiple, I would see them all in here. And over to the right, I can see how much is currently outstanding. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that and hit my go button. And now I can go, all right, what am I applying this to? And I can apply this to one or many documents. So I'm going to apply this, first of all, to this invoice, and then I'm going to apply the partial amount to the next invoice. So please note that here in the pending balance, I show the entire amount, and this is the amount here in the applied column that is going to be taken in this particular transaction. So we're only going to apply $78.81 to this particular transaction. And when I move off the line, I will see that my unapplied amount here is now 0. And I can see that my remaining balance on it is going to be $2,884.92, whereas on the other transaction, I am paying it off in its entirety. And when I'm ready, I can hit add. Now let's talk about a couple more functions within the receipt entry screen. We're going to come back to the same customer here, Mr. Persall. we're going to say that we got a check as well for $2,884.90. Now notice that I've got the pending over here, and that's because I have pending transactions for a couple of these documents. And in this case, we're going to pay off most of the remaining balance of this particular transaction. Now notice that this is 2 cents short of paying this off in its entirety. We're going to go ahead and change this to yes. And if we slide over here, we can see that our net balance is 2 cents. Now, what we can do is use the adjustment button here to write off our remaining 2 cents, because we're probably not going to collect that. I'm going to go ahead and find my bad debt account, and I'm going to debit that GL account by 2 cents. So I'm going to reduce my receivables by 2 cents and debit or increase my expense account by 2 cents. And I'm going to close. And if I move off and I look at the line here, I can see now that my balance is 0 and I have an adjustment of 2 cents. So that way you can make small changes and adjustments to receipts as they come in. Let's talk about a couple more. Yes, I want to add this entry. Let's go to Mr. Ronald Black, and let's say I've got a $1,000 receipt from him. However, I don't know what to apply this to. I could, as we talked about earlier, do this as an unapplied cash and come back to it later, or we can do a proration. And so we can either prorate that across the open documents or top down. And I'm going to hit top down, auto apply, and refresh. And so it's then picked the oldest invoice here and applied it to that transaction. And so I'm going to then hit add. Okay, our final transaction is a miscellaneous receipt. So sometimes you receive funds and it's not from a customer, it's from some other organization. It's not something you want to create a customer for, but you need to record the deposit. And so in this case, we're going to say our receipt is from the Department of Revenue, and we've got a miscellaneous refund back, and we need to deposit that amount. So I'm going to enter a check number here. And in this case, now I have just a GL grid here, and I'm going to enter my GL account number, which is corporate income taxes, and I'm going to enter the amount of the refund. And that happens to be $8.13. It's just a small little refund. And so I put that dollar amount in here. If I had multiple GL accounts, I could hit my insert key and use my finder and select a different GL account. But in this case, I'm just going to do the one GL account. And when I'm ready, I can hit the add button. Oops, I forgot to put in the amount of $8.13 there. And hit add. Okay, so now I have created all my various entries, and I can do a couple things. One, if I want, I can hit the deposit button here and get a deposit report that I can use and attach to my check stubs and put that as part of my documentation. Now, if I want to, I could use the post button back here in receipt entry, or I could use my receipt batch list. I'm going to hit the refresh button to see my batch, and I could flag this ready to post and use the post all button, or I could just hit the post button and post the batch. Remember, the post button will post one individual batch, and the post all will post every single batch where the ready to post flag is yes. So if you have 3 or 4, some multiple number of batches that you want to post at once, you can flag them all as ready to post and use the post all button. Now, the other thing, I'm going to come here and show my posted and deleted batches. And if I want, I also have the option to hit a batch register. And this will show all the transactions that I have done in my batch and provide the details. One final thing that we want to show along with receipt entry is running an AR aging. So sometimes you need to do a report of how much does each customer owe you. And so you can come into the AR aging and AR transaction reports, aged trial balance, and you get this screen. So you can select your report type by a couple different metrics, age trial balance by due date or document date, or just for overdue amounts. You can adjust your date that you want to age on. So maybe you want to age as of the 29th, the last day of the prior month. If you're doing a prior month calculation, particularly if you're trying to reconcile and tie out to your general ledger, I highly recommend changing your cutoff date from document date to year and period. And make this match. And don't forget to change this one down here as well. And this will then pull things based on the fiscal year and period of the transaction. So if there are some dating mismatches, this will overcome that and make sure that you're pulling things based on fiscal year and period, which is what your general ledger is going to be running against. Now, you have a few other controls in here. You can run a report that's summarized. The summary report will just show one line per customer, whereas the detail by document date or document number are going to show all the individual transactions that is open on the particular customer and sort it either by the document date or the number, depending on what option you choose. You can change your aging periods in there. Some people might want to do weekly aging periods, maybe for cash flow forecasting purposes. You can also select your customers by different metrics and maybe do a range of customers or do a particular national account. Or if you come into some of these lower ones, you get a much bigger list and you can do things like customer group or account set. Furthermore, you can sort your customers by these. So you might want to say, I'm going to sort my customers by customer group. And then I want to put a title and a total around each of those sections. So that way I get a subtotal by customer group. I have a few other things over here. I can only include customers over their credit limits. I can show phone numbers. I can include customers with a zero balance. Finally, you can select different transaction types. So one thing to note is when you're doing a reconciliation of your accounts receivable to your general ledger, and you're trying to tie out your subledger total to the amount that is in your AR receivable account, you might want to uncheck your prepayments to set those aside so that your total more easily matches what is in that account. And then you would want to run the report again just for prepayments and compare that total to the amount in your prepayment liability account. I'm going to run this white out. And we get our document here, and we can see all the open transactions here. And we can see that we've done this by customer group. So my first customer group is BF, and I have my total here for the group. So I have my customer, their open document, their currency is shown here because this is a multi-currency company. And then I see my different aging buckets and the customer total. And then I see my customer group total. And then I move to my next customer group and I see the customer here, their aging. And if I move to the next page, I see more customers because these are all in the same group. And then I finally get my customer total here, and it is broken out by currency within that group. So that's a brief overview of the age trial balance. And with that, that concludes this Sage 300 training session. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you a great day.